Please welcome Barbara Paley, Karen Brooks Hopkins, and Debra Simon.
Welcome to all of you. We're going to talk about great places, and great places aren't just space, but it's art, it's artists, it's technology, it's creating economic development. It's the place you want to be. With me are Karen Hopkins, who recently left BAM after 40 years of making place in Brooklyn and
36, not quite 40.
Don't argue.
All right.
But making Brooklyn the place to be, a downtown Brooklyn, creating all that connections of community. Debra Simon works for Brookfield. Brookfield understands that placemaking is the private side, creating collaborations with artists, museums, the food community, the creative community all around to make all of Brookfield's buildings. You're in 37?
37 sites in the US. And we also have programs in our sister programs in Canada and Australia.
So an essential thinking of Brookfield is that art and culture is part of making great places, having great tenants, having leading edge tenants, and being ahead of the crowd. So welcome.
Thank you. I just want to make a correction. I'm the Vice President of Arts Brookfield, and also when I was on my final interview for the job, I said I also have to be the artistic director because I have to have credibility with artists, and I can't let my artist friends think I've gone to the dark side of corporate America. So I made them make me artistic director as well.
I think that's a problem in society, is that we think if we're making money on the art side, this is a terrible thing. And I encounter this so often with curators and museum personnel and artists. It's not. The creative economy in New York is $25 billion. That's an extraordinary amount of money that feeds into the way we use our spaces. And I think it's very important that we understand there is no dark side. You bring light to all of us.
It's very nice. Well, I guess that if we're talking about global cities, it would really be worthwhile to take a moment and talk about the advent of these cultural districts that are kind of popping up everywhere, and how the model for these entities has really changed significantly, I would say mostly over the last 10 to 15 years. You know, the 20th century, we saw the advent of a lot of centers built the way that Lincoln Center is built, sort of edifice, edifice, edifice plaza, very monolithic, large institutions, a lot of parking underground, classically based work inside. And we all know that it cost $1 billion for Lincoln Center, for example, to rethink itself, revision itself.
The first billion.
And to try to engage more with the street life of the city. Now, in New York, there is always room for classically based work, large institutions, and so forth. But other cities, I think, around the country and around the world are discovering a new model, and one that is much more in tune with the energy of 21st century cities. And that model, such as we formed in Brooklyn, is small and large institutions, ethnically diverse, visual and performing arts, everything looking different, feeling different, and all kind of pulled together with a common streetscape. And this creates a sort of organized chaos with art at its center that we're seeing that is really driving a lot of the vibe around cultural districts today. This is what we endeavor to do in Brooklyn, and I think that it's coming up and it's very exciting. And now comes the next set of problems, which really deal with gentrification and how you maintain authenticity when everyone has finally discovered a neighborhood and turned it into a global destination.
And I think a lot of that kind of energy is also what's driving the transformation of the workspace. I think a lot of it is being driven by the new generation of employees who also demand an energized and progressive workplace. I think, as Kent Larson from the MIT lab says, social ties increase productivity and innovation. And I think that that's true, no matter what industry you work in. You want to work in an energized place that is curated. We see that with the evolution of the WeWorks coming in, curating their workspace. They want to blend their personal interests with their work interests. So Brookfield was way ahead of the curve with the Reichmans 28 years ago when they built what was then the World Financial Center, which is now Brookfield Place, and they built this iconic, glorious atrium surrounded by these shops, and they said, wow, this is a beautiful building. We got to put something in here. It just can't be unprogrammed. And so they created the Arts and Events program there, which they've now since replicated all across the country, where it's a mixture of not only just for the tenants, but it's become a destination for the community. And we've had programming that people have come as far away as Boston and Washington, D.C. If we're programming something that is the only appearance of a particular performer in the country, they will come that far to see it. And we see that again and again in Denver and Houston and Los Angeles. And I also want to make sure we don't exclude, as Bobby said, the role of the artists. We can't talk about creating dynamic places without the role of an artist. We're hearing so much about the building of theaters, but where are we also have to make sure that we are building an infrastructure to support the artists. And one of the things that I'm most proud about is that we employ hundreds of artists across the country all year to do the work and give their work exposure to hundreds of audiences. And also, by everything we do is free. So what I'm hoping to also do is to cultivate the next generation of cultural consumers who, whether by intimidation or lack of affordability, would maybe not have access to this kind of art. So it's really a very democratic way of presenting art.
Did you want to make a comment?
No, I mean, I just think that as we talk about this connection between the corporate world and the not-for-profit art world, that it behooves us to also look at the way that these relationships are being developed. It's really terrific that Brookfield is providing support and enabling a lot of work and artists. I think the next thing that corporations can do, and certainly real estate developers can do, is when they go into cultural districts, such as we have in Brooklyn, once they realize that there is a really viable economic base there that has been made successful because the cultural institutions are there, I think it's important for them to support the cultural institutions. These leaders and developers need to go on boards. They need to make contributions. They need to partner with the institutions so that the institutions can connect to their residents. And everybody needs to support everybody else. Too often, the developers will come in, take the money out of the neighborhood that these arts institutions have struggled to make exciting and great, and not give back. And I think in Brooklyn we've had a lot of success with bringing developers on our boards, getting them involved in projects, and making sure that everybody supports everybody else. At the same time, the institutions need to welcome residents. They need to reach out to them. They need to make the neighborhoods as exciting as promised, and to provide a lot of free events, community events, education programs, as well as opportunities for residents to become members, be ticket buyers, and so forth. That neighborhood building can't be done in a vacuum. It needs to be done together, and there's really room for everyone. And then the last thing I would say about that is that the other big challenge and problem is that once the neighborhoods do become more economically viable, I believe that in cultural districts, it is really important that the ground floor retail is either used for culture or audience amenities. These neighborhoods can tend to deaden out in 1 second when you start loading them up with chain stores and other things that make them feel like everywhere else in the world. And it's their unique persona that makes them great. And we have to fight to protect that.
I'm going to talk as a developer. 9 years ago, I bought 9 buildings on Atlantic Avenue between 3rd and 4th when BAM Cultural District was was there, but still struggling to identify itself. And what we did as developers is we did a lot of pop-up art installations, and we brought in pop-up fashion and food and creativity. And somebody, I think it was Dan, that was talking about where the building meets the street. And that was our entry point, because everybody wanted to be in Brooklyn in 2006, but nobody understood where the tenants were, where the brokers didn't understand it. So there was that interstitial space where we, as developers and very early, helped change the perception of what Atlantic Avenue was. And I want to talk about the few things that we did that I think are lessons, no matter what side of the coin you're on in real estate. What we did is we brought in pop-up artists, sand artists, people in the stores, music groups. We painted our buildings. We took the historic colors of Brooklyn and mixed them up so that floor, molding, upper floors were all different colors, but it was a palette.
Wait, what are the historic colors of Brooklyn?
Well, there was a historic district that was adjacent to us. And while we were not in the historic district, everybody was so frantic about gentrification and these 3 white girls that bought these buildings that we just decided we'd be neutral and take those colors. So there was a historic palette for Atlantic Avenue. The other things we did is we invited local cultural groups to come in and use our space for a month or 3 months. So Mark Morris did a residency there and did some community engagement. And in telling you this story, I'm doing the same thing in Bushwick in a building that we've bought. In telling you this story, I think that whatever your entry point is, whatever you do in your business life and your personal life, there's a way to integrate art, business, technology, economic development, and to make our streets and our places into civic places where we all want to walk, hang out, and invite our friends.
And I think both of you, especially Karen's made a very good point. I think one of the first places we stop when we start into a new city is the Department of Cultural Affairs to say, we're very mission driven, and our mission is to help the cultural community that we are in.
Yep.
So we'll go in and say, what do you need? So as an example, in Houston, they said, we have a terrific collection. It's just sitting in storage. We want to get it out in the public. So we said, terrific, we've got space, you've got a collection. Let's work together, and you can throw a big fundraiser around it. And you can actually sell memberships to the 20,000 people that work in this building. And we're happy to do it. Great collaboration. Perhaps it'll lead to other things. We work with a series of young directors. We have this really funky 1970s auditorium at the base of one of our buildings in downtown LA. We're running a director's lab, free of charge. Come in, do your residency, do your work. We're now working with potentially working with a major institution on downtown LA to do an international invite 4 to 6 artists to come do residencies at the top of our building with these unbelievable views of all of Los Angeles. And we're working on a way that we could go to a foundation together and get funding together. We have empty space with amazing buildings. You want to start a residency program, you have no real estate, let's see how we can work together. And so these are all ways that you can collaborate and help cultural institutions in your neighborhood figure out what you've got, what they need. So that's how we try to make deals wherever we can.
The thing about art in a community, it's come full circle in certain ways. In one way, we want our field to have more respect. We feel that the field of arts and culture is often dismissed as a frill, it's often dismissed as elitist, it's often disregarded. Whenever there are budget cuts, the first thing that go are the arts, and on and on and on. So one of the challenges that we have is bringing respect to the field for the following reason. The arts generate the largest tourist dollars of any sector in terms of when people obviously come to a city like New York, they're not coming here for the weather. I mean, we know that. The arts enhance love of learning and raise the bar for education. The arts build the economy of communities. The greatest architectural buildings generally in any city are art buildings. And then last, but certainly not least, is the art itself, which is the only thing that actually endures from century to century to century to century. So in a certain way, we have to take a step back and say, why does our field not get the respect that it deserves on a regular basis, and why is it dismissed so quickly? So this is one big topic. But then the other side of it is artists come into neighborhoods and they usually go in places that no one else necessarily wants to go into empty spaces, as far as, because if space is cheap, then artists will come in there. So this is good. But if the artists then bring about a certain kind of gentrification and that the local community's heart and soul is not taken into consideration, this is not good. And we need to strike a balance so that art really does get the respect that it deserves, that cultural entities and what they bring to neighborhoods get the respect that they deserve, but at the same time, the quality and image and whatever it is that makes that local community a local community is not dismissed, that it's enhanced, that it's connected with, if you can say that, and that in every way that is also given the maximum amount of respect and partnership. Because if the whole thing is not taken into consideration and visioned together and speak in one voice, then it will fragment and not endure in the best possible way.
So what does the 21st century look like? Here we are in 2015. We know about great places all over the world. I think our city is changing. The face of it is changing. Design is more important. What's the future, the near future, as you see it? Debra?
I see a blending of technology and the arts coming more and more together. I think that people more and more are yearning for the social connections of experiences. I think there'll be a companion experience to having art in a more traditional venue. I think there'll be more of people coming together in other ways, in public spaces or individually, and I think we'll see more of a blurring of the two.
Are developers wanting people to hang out in their public spaces?
I think it really depends. I think you're going to see a lot more mixed-use development. So I think the answer is yes, you're going to see a lot more commercial blended with residential and hotels and recreational amenities. So I think yes.
Just as a side note, Harriet Tregoning, who's now working for Sean Donovan at HUD, was head of planning in Washington, and she spoke to us at ULI a while ago and talked about how Washington has these grand spaces and big sidewalks, and people are wanting more social spaces, more hangout spaces, more places to come down and do their work. And the parking garages. So she was remastering how those public spaces work and how to get more people into them. She was also taking parking garages and renting them out to small entrepreneurs, people who fix bikes, who have a little business, because parking is something that's going to be a different way of life in our cities.
And I also think as more and more of these developments have a retail associated with
Yes.
they need people to feed the retail more than just 5 days a week.
And I think the combination of mixed use is the most viable one for our societies today and the most interesting.
I guess, like I said, I think that the future is that it needs to be very much connected to what places already are, and then there needs to be thoughtful growth so that things can really, have a soul.
Yeah.
I think that's very important. I am very much opposed to the idea of every place looking like every place else. I think that this is a very deadening thing. I think that this is the case all over America, that you really don't know where you are half the time. I think that that in a way, part of the success in Brooklyn is because that's what happened to Manhattan, that it became a giant chain store in many neighborhoods, and therefore people who are urban and want character in their neighborhoods discovered Brooklyn. I think that that was part of it, and now there's a danger of that happening in Brooklyn. So we have to be very thoughtful about valuing the urban areas that we've made these enormous investments in. I think cities are very exciting now. They've come back. Young people want to be in cities. Transportation hubs, public transportation allows this energy to rise, and we need to be thoughtful about how it's going to grow.
So I want to sum up by saying that I think the things that make great places are connectivity on every level. The connectivity of creativity. Creativity is like water, and it flows. The connectivity of people. The connectivity of people to the space and the place. We all are responsible for civic places. We have a role, and I think it's important to know that we must do our part. You do your part, and we must do ours. Thank you ever so much. This has been a
Thanks,
pleasure.
everyone. Thank you.